Okay, guys, here we are, another week just flown by, and we've got a really special guest, someone who's had a bit of an impact in my life because I've consulted her from a number of times. She is one of the amazing astrologers that I've had the privilege of consulting. She's pretty special because she also runs a really cool astrology school. There's so much we're going to learn from her. And she is big on what's going on astrologically with COVID. So that should excite most of us, given that's our purpose since we started, how to maximize our ability to deal with it should it show up. So without further ado, let me introduce you now to Wendy Stacey. Wendy, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here.
And guys, you don't know this, but she's actually in Tenerife. How cool is that?
Managed to escape, yes.
So you went out there on holiday just for Christmas or something, and you get stuck. Nice place to get stuck.
Yep. So we're stuck until they bring us back.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, look. What would be really helpful for our audience is to find out how you fell into astrology. You know, you're blooming good at it, but how did you get into it? That'd be really cool. Give people a bit of your backstory, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, I was pretty young when I fell into it. I was 19, so quite a few decades ago. And I just went for a reading actually, and within 5 minutes I went, oh my God, can I learn this? How can I learn this? And I sort of plunged into it from there, really. And when you sort of start learning astrology, it's very hard to go back. So yeah, and I just sort of kept going, and it brought me from New Zealand to the UK when I was about 25 to continue working and learning. I mean, it is a lifetime apprenticeship. It's a great one.
Yeah, I mean, one can only imagine you've had such satisfaction working with so many clients over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. You learn a lot from clients. It's one of the great things about astrology. I mean, I do a lot of teaching and researching and writing and volunteering and things like that as well. But
you're a prolific writer, aren't you? I mean, you've published a lot, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I keep going. I mean, I think I've published over 50 articles for the Astrological Journal. So, I love it. So keeps me busy.
Yeah, and now you're running your own school, which we'll talk about later. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Fantastic. Well, one of the things I know that you're doing very, very well, and folks, every fortnight or so, Wendy's got a program she comes on and she talks about current affairs and so on. But obviously, she's covered COVID. So, given that's why we got into this last year, was to help people with fear and anxiety around COVID. I mean, Wendy, what you obviously an astrologer, one can't imagine too many astrologers predicted a specific virus, but certainly one can only imagine that what's been happening over the past year or so was somehow or other showing up, although it wasn't specifically, I would imagine. But so what have you found in terms of looking at it, maybe with your colleagues as astrologers? What do you see as unfolding, and what's your view on it?
Well, I mean, astrologers have been talking about 2020 for years. We knew it was going to be a big year. I mean, my background in sociology, so I'm interested in things that are economical, political, social, things like that. So we did know that this was going to be a tough year, and it was sort of bookended with quite massive cycles we haven't seen for 500 and 800 years. So and along with that there's other cycles as well. So when you get a culmination of all of these things, you expect some pretty massive change to occur. When you think about the 500-year cycle that hit again in January last year, I mean, that cycle is quite historically affiliated with certain plagues in our history, and the cycle that bookended the end of the year in December is a cycle that's very much about freedom, actually, and more independence. And so we are But whilst they bookended the year, there was a lot of other cycles that occurred. We knew that the sort of end game would be the 14th of November last year. And even though the road's long and hard, and but that would be the game changer. And I think that's exactly when the vaccine was approved, the first vaccine, which I think was the Pfizer. I think it was the 13th, 14th or 15th. So even though, you know, there is, you know, still we have to get through these last obstacles and jump over these hurdles, we are on our way out of this. Another cycle that occurred hasn't happened for 170 years. For example, this is, you know, Neptune and Pisces. And I mean, the last time we had this, the whole world had to be vaccinated against smallpox. People in the UK were fined. Parents were fined if they didn't vaccinate their children. And, you know, Pisces is about, and Neptune and Pisces is about pharmaceutical companies. It's about the spread of things. And also, and on top of that, there's another cycle of Chiron that has a 50-year cycle, and that's affiliated with the Hong Kong flu in 1968, the Spanish flu in 1918. Wow. Yeah, and so when you get all these cycles and you can, you know, see them all happening at the same time. I mean, the interesting one about the 50-year cycle, I mean, there's a particular planet Chiron that's at the same degree it was in 1968 and 1918. And it's interesting because it picks up Florence Nightingale's chart. Wow. And the fact we've got all these Nightingale centers, you know, popping up in the UK. And also the Neptune and Pisces one, when in February last year, Neptune was at 16 degrees of Pisces. Now, the last time that actually happened was almost 170 years ago, or more than that. When Florence Nightingale finished in the Crimean War, she came out and told the whole world they had to wash their hands. So this planet, 170 years later, comes to the exact same point in the sky, and the whole world is told to wash their hands. So we can see all this. I mean, of course, it's easier to see it in hindsight in astrology, you know. And you don't predict these things that, you know, you wouldn't imagine that the whole world are wearing masks. But when you look at pictures and images from particularly 1918 and 1968, it's very similar. It's very similar. So that's the astrology behind it, really, for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people get confused about astrology being some kind of fortune telling thing, and of course it isn't. And so I think when astrologers can observe what's going on astrologically over a period of time, then reflect back to previous cycles, then it begins to make sense, like you're saying, and then it maybe helps us make more informed decisions about going forward, I suspect. I mean, I know people will want me to ask this, given some previous guests we've had. We're certainly not, you know, claiming to be anti-vaxxers or, you know, what's the word, virus deniers or anything, but we're not. But we've had some interesting people on who have scientifically and otherwise asked questions. Sure. And so there is patterns, as you probably know, there's patterns to viruses and or flus that suggest that what's happening in terms of the first wave, the second wave, that the virus would probably begin to wane anyway, with or without a vaccine, because that's just what they do. And one would imagine, or I'm asking, does that kind of show up in the astrology that you're seeing, that it would fade away? And the big question for us, given that quite a number of us are slightly fearful of taking a vaccine that so suddenly appeared, you know, they usually take about 5-10 years to develop, and we've got one in 5 months, type of thing, a wee bit concerned about it, because we don't really know if it's safe yet, because people only had it in their arms for a few weeks. But it would really help. What do you think, and as you discuss it with your fellow astrologers at your kind of level, you know, super astrologers, what do you think it's going to go away anyway? And are you quite, without asking you to do any political end, but do you feel as an astrologer the vaccine's probably going to be okay? Where's your head with that? That would probably help a lot of people here.
Well, I mean, I'm not a great vaccination supporter. I mean, there was a lot of vaccinations I didn't give my children
Yeah,
because I don't like it. But on the other hand, you know, if you're going to go to parts of the world, you have to have vaccinations.
yeah,
I think there's a lot of, you know, the coronavirus vaccinations have been worked on for like 13 years. So there is a lot of history and a lot of sort of building to this. I think it's the coronaviruses have been around for a while now, so there has been some efforts into vaccinations with that. Of course, now we have the whole world and we have a lot of money put into this.
yeah,
So, I mean, my own personal um, sort of take on this, which is tied up with the astrology of it, it's very difficult to separate the two, is that the whole world's going to need it. And I understand people's fears. The cycle that happened last year, I mean, it was very, like the particular one in January, it was a cycle that is probably one of the most fearful periods that we will live through in our lifetime.
wow,
And so there is fear and there is high anxiety.
yeah,
And also there's generations born from that sort of late 80s, early 90s that sort of continue to carry that with them. So we're living in a very heightened fear and anxious period. So I think it's normal to feel like that. And safety is going to be of you know, prime concern. But for me, I think it goes back to that same cycle that unfortunately it's going to take everyone to be vaccinated to eradicate this, you know, because I think it will continue to mutate. The virus will continue to mutate until we eradicate it. And when the cycle last year is all about lockdown, it's all about testing, it's all about deprivation in a way, like everyone has suffered in the
yeah,
last year.
yeah.
So I do think, even though I'm not a vaccination advocate by any means, but I think that is the only outcome here,
Wow.
really.
And you mentioned the cycles that are affecting pharmaceutical companies.
Mm.
I, I mean, do you see that particular cycle as being a positive emphasis, or is it, you know, it's that thing about, is again, a lot of people on here may be slightly suspicious of big pharma and
Absolutely.
that particular model that, you know, something's wrong, find a drug, as opposed to if something's wrong, what caused it? Can we get rid of what caused it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. The thing with astrology is that things can happen at sort of all ends of the spectrum of what, you know, what can
Yeah,
actually unfold with a cycle. And yes, on one hand, you're going to see pharmaceutical companies making a lot of money. They're going to
yeah,
dominate the economy, and
yeah,
everything associated with that will do so as well. On the other side, you know, and that's probably you know, a challenge or a negative, if you like, but on the other side, on a very positive side, you have the whole world working together, sharing
yeah,
this information. This
yeah,
cycle is also about connectivity and sharing and spreading. So the positive of that is people are sharing this information, that it sort of rises above it. It becomes a human issue. It becomes a much bigger than money, if you
fantastic.
like, which is, you know, if some people can imagine that happening, but it, you know, and that's what's happening as well. And you know, also there's a lot of volunteers on this. This is, you know, the other side to this cycle is huge compassion and empathy and just people wanting to help humanity. And so that is the very positive side of that. And so there'll always be um, you know, very positive and very negative sort of manifestations. At the end of the day, I guess it's human nature. I think
I mean,
that
that's
sort of drives
fantastic
them.
insight, and I'm sure everyone's going to be, you know, light up with that view that you've got there, which is wonderful. I mean, we're all about, ultimately, my work, as you know, is about taking a positive mental attitude and another, like programming features. I mean, for my work, married with astrology, we would say, look, what are the cycles? Let's program the best outcomes, with the cycles we're facing.
Yeah.
And so it's always great that that oh, it's particularly good that you put that reflection on that. So something you said, which is really empowering, is that 2020 would have been anyway, no matter how it was going to show up, would have been a very challenging year. But the positive that's coming out of it is, it seems to be the collaboration, the cooperation, the empathy, the willingness to presumably work together, which we're seeing globally. What other sort of emphasis do you see in 21 that might be positive for us to look out for?
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna start. There's still a bit of debris to clean up. There's a few cycles that are going to be occurring this year that is really about debris. It's also, excuse me, it's you know, it's very much the cycles this year. It's sort of planet versus sky, or Earth versus sky. So I think we're going to see a lot of battling with climate change.
Yeah.
I think. But, you know, I say that, but I mean, I'm very excited. The cycle that occurred in December, we haven't had for 800 years. It's an incredible period to live through. It is, I think I feel very lucky that we are going to be living through this era, which is going to be so much. It's going to be massively invested in travel, flight, space, independence, and new innovations in so many areas of it, well, in every area of our world, of our life. And so I think it will happen very quickly. When I say quickly, you know, we will see the changes in our lifetime. And yeah, I think it's going to be very Star Trek, if you like. That's my your sort of description of how I see things unfold, but it's positive and it's also liberating. You know, again, that not every, you know, we are humans. There's going to be pitfalls and obstacles, but ultimately we are living through a very special time. And I think the 2020 will be the catalyst for that. I mean, like, for example, you know, so I've been talking about kids learning online for years, but I didn't, and I knew it would happen fast, but I didn't realize that the virus would be the catalyst for that. And I think COVID is definitely going to be the catalyst for many things, particularly innovations in flight and stuff like that.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's so exciting. It's just wonderful. I'm so glad you come on, because you lift all our spirits with this, which is just wonderful. And so obviously, what astrologers were thinking about 2020 and knowing it was going to be big, it wasn't just a blip. It was obviously transformative. It was going to lead to something much better. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. Amazing. Starting with something really challenging, not pleasant, you know, high anxiety and fear. And then 2021, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in December, which hasn't happened for 800 years in this particular place. So that's gonna change. It's again, another game changer. So you've got these different cycles occurring, and they're huge. They're really, really, really huge. So I do believe life is about to change, and COVID will be the driving force behind that now.
When you've looked back to 800 years ago, what were the kind of positive things that were coming out of that cycle? Can you remember? Or
I do. That? Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, in 800 years ago, there's two figures that really stand out for me. One is Alfonso X, the King of Castile. And what he did is he got Catholics, Jewish, Muslims, and he took the Bible, the Quran, the Book of Hebrew, and the Book of Kabbalah. And what he did is he got all these people together to write a universal language and a universal law. So like a universal constitution. He was so effective in that, that his painting hangs in the House of Representatives in the United States Senate, because much of his universal law is part of the US Constitution. He also tried to create a language. Now, one of the problems with this particular cycle is it's very highbrow. It's quite highly intellectual. So the language of Castile never actually took off because it was too hard, too complicated, too highbrow. So instead, the language of Spanish was invented. And of course, that dominated the world up until, the turn of last century, really. So he was instrumental in bringing people together, to rising above people's beliefs, creating new moral compasses for everyone. And this particular concept is going to be transported to this era. And I mean, and another person I find fascinating is Saint Francis of Assisi. You know, he died at the exact moment this cycle happened 800 years ago, and he was canonized a couple of years later. But he's fascinating because on many levels, I'm not Catholic, but I always knew who he was in a small town growing up in New Zealand. But you know, he was an advocate. I mean, this is really quite interesting for vegetarianism, and we can already see a massive movement in veganism. But the reason he was vegetarian, Jack, I find this really quite lovely actually, is because he loved animals. And if you see any pictures or statues of St. Francis, he's with birds and
stuff.
Birds, and this particular cycle is about the sky. It's about birds. And but he didn't eat animals because he could talk to them. And when you look at the movies that are coming out now, I think of movies like Arrival or things like that, where there's a real movement in terms of us being able to relate to other creatures on this planet, which we don't. Other creatures can understand other creatures, but as humans, we have a long way to go. And I think there's going to be a bit of a change in that. It would be interesting if we invested in other creatures on this planet and see, you know, how we can evolve because of that.
It's that again. It's, I mean, two amazing characters in history. I mean, I don't probably suspect most of us don't know about King Alphonsus, but my God, what a brilliant idea! And what, you know, it's time is now again, isn't it? Absolutely, we need to all get together, especially religions. People won't be surprised about the slight controversy, given some of our recent history, some of us on here, about the vegetarian and veganism thing, because the guy who was on before you tells a story about how he's been locked down as a doctor by vested interests in the vegan movement and the food industry. But so I think what I'm so grateful you mentioned St. Francis of Assisi. I was brought up Catholic, and he's a big part of your thing.
Right. Yeah.
But I think the notion of understanding and talking to animals, I think and you know, I do some advanced stuff where we actually do. And when you talk to animals or you engage in that kind of stuff, it's very clear that they are seriously concerned and express it about how we're treating them. And there are, if people choose to still eat meat, then there are wonderful farmers and people doing amazing things with animals that it gives us hope that we can live in harmony and still benefit, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Until such times, I may add, I think everybody, myself included, if there was ways of surviving healthily without the interference of the food industry and eating vegetables rather than animal products, we all would.
Yeah.
It's got so far to go in terms of real nutrition.
Yes, I agree. There's
a big, and of course, even just this is very exciting what you're saying, because if what you're saying about this reset, as it were, 800 years on, we not only need to consider the animals, we need to consider what we're doing to the planet, with how we're actually growing vegetables. So this is really, really exciting. It's really exciting.
It is. I think it's I mean, I know it's hard to see right now, but I do think, you know, it is going to be so exciting. You know, come a year or two down the track, things are going to be taking off and the innovations are going to be incredible, I think. Particularly, excuse me, there's also a cycle at the moment where the planet Uranus is traveling through the sign of Taurus, and Taurus is a sign of the cow, and it's, you know, and when, you know, when we've had mad cow's disease and foot and mouth and all that, this has been triggered over and over. But at the moment, you've got Uranus going through Taurus, and Uranus is not only the planet of technologies. So already you can see cow farming, you know, dairy farming changing drastically. It's
Fantastic.
becoming technologicalized, but also with that, you're getting innovations in reproducing meat products that aren't, necessarily animal. So, this is a really interesting time, and watching how this unfolds, actually. Yeah.
Very good.
And hopefully, but like you say, we have a long way to go. I mean, I think the younger generation are driving this as well. I think that's where the majority of veganism, advocates are. But I just see this with the younger generation who are a bit more resistant to eating meat and invested in being with one.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hoping though is that young, inquisitive minds actually look into it with a wider view to fully understand their decision making.
Yeah.
And without getting into the history of this particular podcast a year on or show, we've had a few people on who have been helping us understand the science that's driving veganism, and some of it is very dodgy science in terms of how good it is nutritionally.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mean, if we can, again, going back to what I said, if we can find ways of ethically, carefully, nutritionally finding ways of creating products that can enhance all our lives.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the abuse of animals. That's going to be everybody. Why wouldn't we want that?
Yeah.
But so moving on a little bit, the other thing that you're alluding to, especially around King Alphonsus, is one of the things we noticed as 2020 came and went was the polarization of the American, particularly the American population, which culminated in the very, very close election. And now the fallout of that, the attack on the Parliament thing. So did you see, does that make sense as well in terms of the...
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like the cycle that happened in December that relates to 800 years ago. At the beginning of 2020, we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, which hadn't happened in 500 years. Now, the last time this happened was 1519. And it's a very fearful, this cycle is very fearful. It really sort of, the people are scared and frightened. I mean, one of the illnesses that came out of that period, it was sort of a mystery to historians for hundreds of years. It was called the dancing disease. And people would actually come out of their homes and they'd be convulsing, basically, mostly through malnutrition, because this cycle also brings in cold weather. Without climate change, we may have even had much colder weather. But it was basically an anxiety disease that killed people in pockets of villages around Europe. But most importantly, in 1519, of course, the Magna Carta, but you also had Martin Luther pinned the 93 Thesis to the door. Which was the overthrow of the Catholic Church, which was the largest, largest authority in the Northern Hemisphere. And of course, Martin Luther didn't intend to do that. He was just complaining. He was just pinning his thesis. So the Reformation that came out of that, and of course, the Protestantism and things like that, is very symbolic for 2020. And not that I'm not a Trump lover by any means at all, but no matter who was going to be in power in America in 2020, as astrologers, we think, well, okay, so what happens is someone is elected to carry that stuff. So he had to go down. And he is also, and he will go down in history for the president that he was, and for or not. And this is very symbolic of what happened 500 years ago. It is an overthrow of authority, and it doesn't just sort of end at Trump. I mean, we felt this cycle in last January building up for 2 years. It started with the Hong Kong protests, started with, and then you almost found every country certainly every continent, but so many countries around the world protesting
Yeah.
Against corruption, because this cycle is about corruption.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, what was interesting is this cycle happened on the 12th of January last year. That is exactly when Donald Trump was being impeached for the first time. It was when another authority, Harvey Weinstein, corrupt, abusive, was being, you know, trialed.
Yeah.
It is a point of bringing, and that's not quite finished yet. So we're going to see a lot of corruption be brought down. You know, which is a great thing. And a lot of countries, a lot of bad leaders are going to be ousted. So there's a lot more protest to continue, but it's not going to be as cinematic, I think, where the word was used for Trump, which you get, you know, but there's going to be a lot more stuff to get rid of. We need to purge. There's still a lot more purging to be done.
And we see that even in Russia, it's just in the last few days.
Exactly. Putin, of course. Then it's going to be China. Then it's going to be Kim Jong-un. You know, these are the leaders. When you think of the leaders that people associate with this, they're going to tumble. It's part of the astrology for that to occur. It's going to have to unfold.
And that's the old main thing. The grey hair. They're all going.
Well, you know, but also, like, I mean, I'm from New Zealand, and I'm absolutely I adore our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, and she's been praised. But you know, the problem is with you being a leader at this point, is you are going to be challenged. I mean, there is a group of people in New Zealand who don't, well, a lot of people in New Zealand who don't like her, and it's like, you know, she's such a model of authority at the moment. Yet you'll still get. I mean, people are not all the same, are they? So you're always going to get people that.
I mean, given the positivity you're sharing with us, do you see that the race situation, particularly in North America, does it begin to sort itself out, do you think?
Yeah, well, both these cycles are tied up with this. Yeah, anything that's like particularly the one in January last year, this is about sort of, you know, institutionalized or systemic sort of inequalities that are going to bring rise to that. And I mean, it's quite interesting because last year, you know, Mars goes into Aries every you know 18 months or so. Last year it was in there for months and months. So what that did is it gets people's, you know, you know, the anger rises. People have had enough. It can be violent, like we saw with the police shootings and things like that. So it's you know, and that was there for a long time last year. I mean, very oddly. And so this, you know, probably perpetuated the issues. With the cycle that happened at the end of December, this is a cycle of equality. It is about humans, you know, rising above any inequality, be it, you know, race, gender, sexual orientation, religious affiliations, all this stuff. I mean, it's interesting because it has to. My uncle used to write for Greenpeace, and I remember once him saying when I was a child, the only way you're going to get humans to hold hands is if there's a threat of aliens, and that's never really left me. But actually, it's possibly, you know, I mean, even COVID didn't. I mean, we did hold hands to a certain extent, and we still are around the world. But there's something about, you know, that may come true, the threat, or, you know, may not be the reality of it, but there's something that has to bring humans together and rise above it. And this cycle is perfect. Exactly what Alfonso X did, bringing people together of all faiths, of all different thinking, of all different language to rise above it. So I'm, you know, definitely championing for that.
This is wonderful, Wendy. Absolutely wonderful. I mean, time inevitably pushes by. It's unbelievable. There's two things I'd like to pick up on it before we come to a close. I'd like to speak to you all day. What about the? I mean, the other thing that was big over the last year would be the economies of the world begin really taking a beating for obvious reasons. How do you see that unfolding? Is there anything happening there?
Yeah, I think the whole economy is going to demand. I mean, this is the astrology sort of is demanding a complete reset, completely. I mean, at the moment, we're trying to band-aid things, and I'm thinking, oh, it's not going to work. It's not going to work, because the cycles that, you know, have occurred in the last year is about bringing down big business. It's about, you know, it's bringing sort of like the sort of old school things. It's about all that decay, all the rotten wood, getting rid of all of that. But that, and the sad thing with that is it takes down all the old historical institutions.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I'm worried. I get worried about the BBC, Marks and Spencer. You know, we've seen it with Deb. You know, we know this is going to happen with retail anyway. But you know, it's the whole banking system. It's the whole stock market system. The systems that don't serve all of society are breaking down. And you know, I could go on and on and on about this, but you know, there's new forms of trade now. There's new forms of, you know, we have cryptocurrencies, you know, there's unregulated different open source forms of banking. You know, we didn't ever think banks would collapse till 2007. But we also have just different industries. I mean, you see it with the young people with, you know, and who are operating on user-based rating systems. Everything's a review, you know. We're operating on much different levels with things like, you know, Airbnb and Uber. These things are just going to be the new platforms. Kids are, you know, I have nieces and nephews earning money on Instagram. Yeah. So there's quite a divide between the sort of old world and new world, I think, right now. Yeah. I think, but it's going to all change completely and utterly. Yeah.
Again, for the better, you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. For the better. It's good. It's open to the world. You know, kids can actually, well, not that I'm advocating for kids to go out and be, you know, influencers on Instagram and TikTok and all that sort of stuff. But it's changing. I mean, there's going to be a need to regulate. There's going to be a need for new infrastructures, but the old ones are not going to work anymore. And America has a massive astrological change going on in the next 2 years. They're not over that yet. No. So in terms of innovations, it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, interesting to watch places like Africa, who are going to be probably the drivers of different and new innovations. You know, it's just, I think it's going to be, an interesting one.
I mean, I've just got a tangent briefly.
Sorry.
Do you see the American president seeing out his 4 years?
Well, no, we sort of see Kamala Harris taking the reins in a couple of years, certainly for the second term, certainly. Wow. And possibly even before that. Yeah. But I think, I think it was, I think Biden did the job. He's already done it. You know, it's. Yeah. I think for most people, and I think people would be. Her popularity is going to increase significantly over the next couple of years.
And I think in her chat sort of thing. It's in the chat of the world.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so go back on course. What about the planet? What about the climate? Do you see stuff there?
Yeah, that's going to be on the agenda, I think, for most countries in the next couple of years. And I think things are going to get, the newspapers will be dominated by climate change. Because this cycle has now gone into air, the air is going to be very, excuse me, the air is going to be of attention on a massive scale. Yeah. Probably because most flights are grounded, a bit like after 9/11, we noticed the clearer airs and the atmosphere and stuff like that. But also the earth as well. Fossil fuels and stuff like that are going to become also, and there's going to be a battle between them. Like the gods of the earth and the sky are sort of fighting it out this year, if you like. Wow. And so I think that's all about climate change. But there's so many positive things that are going to come from this. I mean, I'm in Tenerife and I don't find one solar panel anywhere. And so not one. And it's like, you've got sunshine here, 365 days of the year. I think, I'm expecting in a year, 18 months, it has to change. things like this has to change, it has to move. And I think that's going to be a priority on every government's agenda. And because the astrology sort of is going to dictate that, I think. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I mean, given my history with you personally, I mean, you guys seem to have been ahead of the curve, because whenever I consulted with you, it was on the phone, I wasn't having to travel. We did go and meet a few times, but actually traveling up to have a consultation, you could just do it on the phone. Even if I was in France, I'd be speaking to you.
Yeah.
So what about your own business? What do you, is it thriving? Are you in demand? And what about your school? That sounds, it's a wonderful website there. So how did you get that name? The name's interesting as well.
The Mayo School. Well, Jeff Mayo founded the school in 1973.
Wow.
So that's where I had it. Then it was under another custodian till 2007 till I took it over.
Yeah.
This has been my busiest year. It's been crazy. I can't complain. There's too many people that don't have jobs, including my children. Yeah. It's been really exhausting, but I've also enjoyed giving free stuff. The fortnightly webinar, was going to be for about 6 to 8 weeks. It's been a year now, and it's really amazing to have a bunch of astrologers come on and give their views. It's very informal, that sort of thing, but it also has been very helpful for a lot of people, I think. Just to have that sort of contact and conversation. And I think most astrologers have been very busy, not just consulting, but they've also been doing lots of teaching, doing lots of webinars, because the whole world's got on Zoom, you see. I mean, we were doing online classes in 2008. Yeah. So this was never, this was sort of just, and then of course I've had to put every conference online and stuff like that. So it's been very great in terms of connecting astrologers around the world. And it's quite intimate having a conference. We had a webinar for the Astrological Association 2 weeks ago. We had 384 people on there just tuning in and just having a conversation. It was great.
I mean, Laura loves your fortnightly webinar. I mean, could lay people who watch this, could they sort of
a lot of people
understand it, sort of thing?
Yeah, a lot of people who don't do astrology come in. I mean, some of them have learned a lot about astrology since they've joined, but even if they don't even get it, it's also looking at how astrologers think and why we say what we say and why we look at what we do. So, how
do people find you for that?
They can just go onto the Mayo. It's on the homepage of the Mayo School of Astrology's website. So mayoastrology.com.
Can you write down the website?
Yeah, it's mayoastrology.com.
Fantastic. And it's Mayo?
Yep.
Fantastic. Yep. Fantastic. Yep. Mayoastrology.com.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's free events on there and stuff like that. So
I realize you're extraordinarily busy, but do you occasionally still get the odd consultation in?
Oh yeah. No, I'm busy, and I'm busy here in Tenerife doing Zoom clients, or every day.
If anyone wants to reach out to you, how did they find you?
They can go onto my website, which is about to get revamped. So excuse it, but it's wendystacey.com. So
wendystacey.com, simple as that. Yeah. I mean, Wendy, what are the other things that are currently driving your passions? As an astrologer, what is also sort of, what are you thinking about? What ideas have you got going forward?
Well, like my background is sociology, so I'm interested in all the changes that are occurring, unfolding, and the speed or not in which they are. So I'm interested in the economics of what new industries are coming up, things like that. Yeah. It's going to be fascinating, Jack. It's an interesting world, I think. The next 10 years, the way we live and the industries that are going to come forward, I think is very exciting.
I mean, given what you said about the cycles, air and earth and sky and stuff, do you see I mean, there's two things I'd like to talk to you before we finish as well, which would be the whole thing about flying. I know that you're interested in that. What do you see there? Because all of us would love to travel again, but then you've got the dichotomy. What about the planet and traveling and being almost selfish about that? You know, you're from New Zealand. You know, I want to go to Australia to see my grandchild. You know, what do you see there? And the other thing that I know you're into, which I just love, is the notion of astrocartography. You know, if we do get the chance to travel, you know, could we find the best place to travel to if we consulted astrocartography? What's your view on all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the world is going to, you know, the commuting from between London and Sydney is going to become normal. It's going to become, you know, and it's really interesting. There was a cycle on 9/11. There was the cycle that actually occurred in January, very much affiliated with what happened in 9/11 as well. And these particular planets picked up the US chart. But they were planets of the sky. And I remember, because all astrologers were thinking, what's going on here? Because this is all about the sky. And of course, it was the Twin Towers, it was planes. This is actually, you know, there was an astrologer who, there was the magazine, The Mountain Astrologer, in April before 9/11 had tanks rolling into the Twin Towers on the front cover of their magazine. This is months before. Wow. But it wasn't, of course, these cycles were air and it was planes. But what I found interesting is during that particular couple of days after 9/11, the amount of flight innovations that were in the newspaper that were publicized, I wish I'd cut them out, actually. I really wish I had, because there was things like the Antipode, which was supposed to get from London to New York in 11 minutes. There was a lot of things like that, which is what you'd expect in astrology when you've got, it doesn't always happen. It happens in, you know, it's bountiful, these cycles, the expression of them. But, and so this is what we're going to see now. We're going to see, and I think, you know, like 9/11, the airlines nearly all went under. Yeah. And I think we're going to see the travel industry collapse. And I mean, you know, we're trying to band-aid it, but it actually is going to create new innovation for different ways of flying. I mean, we're seeing this now. People are actually flying with those, what are they called? The
jetpacks.
Yeah, the jetpacks, yeah, but it's happening everywhere, and this is part of it. This is part of it. I mean, on the exact day, I think, of the Jupiter-Saturn in air, a guy in LA was arrested because he was flying near the airport in a jetpack. I mean, this is humans flying. Yeah. And really easily. I mean, this, of course, needs, again, like regulation. You can't have everyone out there running around with jetpacks. But this is the sort of things I think we're going to find. So commuting around the world is going to become standard. You can live in the Amazon and commute to Paris for work. I think, you know, I've been saying for years, find somewhere beautiful to live, because I think it's, it's going to ramp up now. But unfortunately, it may be at the demise of some industries that cannot recover from this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the other underlying reasons why we've kept, I mean, just like you thought you would do 6 weeks or something. I thought I would do two a year ago, and God, here we are. You know, we're still doing it every week and getting amazing guests like yourself. The thing is, so you see the travel thing expanding and getting the chance to get out there. Do you see particular lessons that we're going to maybe learn because we can travel? Is there anything that you're seeing there? And I think would you recommend that people look into astrocartography so they can find out where that beautiful place is to go and live?
Absolutely.
And open up to allow us to do it.
Absolutely. And yeah, sorry, I forgot to answer that question. Yeah, astrocartography, when you put your chart on the world map, and it's really helpful to see why you may not like this particular place that everyone else does, you know, or why you feel like this in this particular place, why, you know, and depending on what you're wanting to create, you know, if you're wanting to access depends on what you do. If you're a journalist, then you'd follow this particular line for your work. But for relaxation, you may want to be here. So you have these sort of different areas that sort of, I guess, do different things for you. One is you may be spotlighted here, but you may want to hibernate. So you follow this particular planetary line. And astrocartography is fabulous for that. I mean, for example, I have something running through Hawaii, which indicates like children, and I've been there and I've been pregnant there, and I have clients that have babies that I'm always writing reports for, but they're all sort of in Hawaii because that's where my chart runs through. But and there's things like that can be really interesting and helpful. When I go to a certain place in America, I can't sleep because there's something that my chart is running through there, which keeps me awake all night, which never happens anywhere else in the world. So it's fascinating. Yeah. So if you can use astrocartography to find a place where you could live or where you could be very happy on different levels. Highly recommend it. Yeah.
Fantastic. We've nearly got the hour. It's just coming up and going. Anything else you'd like to share with us? Is there any project you would like us to be aware of, or?
I think maybe, which I haven't really spoken about, but I'll do it very briefly, is I think what we're going to find with this cycle is we're going to find a lot of changes in reproduction. So yeah, very much so. I'm not even sure we'll be procreating in the same way in a very short period of time. That may be tied up with COVID or some other potential virus or something that real or not real, that may come forward. But I do think, we're moving away, and I do think that's one of the concerns I have, is this cycle that happened at the end of December is very freedom orientated and liberating, but it's not very I wouldn't say friendly, but so I'm always sort of going on about Bonheimer's quote, which was reiterated by Nelson Mandela. It said that the measure of a society is what it leaves its children. And I'm very strong for that. So I think we need to sort of I'm sort of advocating and care for how we move forward with.
I think our grandchildren, in my case, will inherit a better planet.
Yes.
Yeah. You see that?
Absolutely.
And
I know it doesn't seem like that.
That's what you see in the astrology.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be a different world.
Yeah.
It'll be a little bit more disconnected. I think I don't know if it'll be as tactile, as intimate as as our generations have experienced, but they're going to be more have access to a lot more things. I think that's it. Access and interest is going to be huge.
Wow.
So
finally, are there any? I suppose we all do this now. I find it doing it with all my friends. Is there anything on Netflix that you recommend watching, or is it a book that you're reading that you think might be interesting to our audience?
Yeah, is it The Social Dilemma? I think I watched on Netflix. I think it's called The Social Dilemma, which is I found fascinating. It's so educational, right. On and this is all sort of documented by the CEOs of Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. These guys are and how social media has evolved. And accidentally, and it's so educational. I mean, it's only I think an hour and 15. Another my daughter said to me, "Mum, can we watch Fabulous or Fantastic Fun Guy on Netflix?" And I thought she meant Fantastic Fun Guy, but actually it was fungi. So it was on mushrooms. And what fascinated me on that is how, and this again is this Uranus and Taurus, I always see it through the astrological side, of how we can use certain mushrooms to even help Alzheimer's, eradicate Alzheimer's and things like this, which I'm really hoping is going to, I mean, it's very pizzazz. It's not the, not normally what I'd watch, but it's an interesting, these concepts I think are going to be brought to our attention. Like, doctors at the moment are recommending vitamin C, vitamin D and zinc. And it's like, yes, yes, thank God, this is good. This is good stuff.
It's all good. It's all good. And are there any particular maybe books that you're reading and that you might, or one you've read that's kind of blown you away? Or
well, at the moment, excuse me, just I'm reading this for the. Oh, can you see that?
No, you can't see it because of your back screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's I'm reading *Sapiens: A Brief History
Sapiens,
of Humankind* by Yuval Noah Harari, and so I'm reading it again because I just think it's great. I just think it's a good reminder of where we come from and where potentially we're going. So
it's a great book. It's a great book. Well, listen, that just absolutely flew by. I mean, it's interesting given what you've been talking about the sort of the December thing and the sort of potential change and swing. You've completely, we were getting into they've completely taken us off in a different direction, which is quite exciting for us, for us as a group. And I'm really, I mean, what I do with this is I kind of present this to people live on Facebook on Wednesday night on my Facebook page. It's a kind of funky thing. I talk to them first, then I'll let them watch you on my laptop, and then we talk again, and then it goes up without me doing topping and tailing on my YouTube channel the next day.
Cool.
And then, but what I'll send you the links to the Facebook thing because you can see the comments. I guess you're going to really we're going to get a lot of really cool comments. We tend to,
Great. Well, you work with great people, I have to say.
Well, we've been. I mean, you sort of reach out to someone. Would you be interested in coming on? And I mean, I wasn't even sure if you would come on. I thought, well, what we should do. But there you are. And I've been so blessed. I mean, I've had professors and. I mean, more than one professor and, medical doctors and research scientists and goodness knows what. It's been an amazing journey and long may it continue. But we'll get you back on again at some time in the future to see, when the big events come and go. Because again, I've long since learned it's not about fortune telling, but I also find it fascinating when astrologers look at current situations and explain it.
Yeah.
And recent things, you go, right, that's why that happened. It's really cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's great. It's a great insight, and it's great stuff that what you're doing, Jack. I think it's great. And like I said, you've got wonderful people around you. Wonderful.
And you're hoping, or maybe not, to get back from Tenerife in the near future back to London?
Hopefully next week. But then, today we just found out that the variant in England they listed 6 postcodes in England, and mine's one of them. And so is my father-in-law's, so that's in West London. So it's like, oh my gosh, no. So I'll come home. I'll bring the family home when we can be a bit safer, I think, or feel a bit safer, I think.
Just the final thing, just people to hear it, is, I mean, you're naturally, unlike myself, you're skeptical about vaccines, but you're probably going to take this one.
Yeah. I prefer the AstraZeneca, because it doesn't have the genetic side, mutation side of it. But so
that's interesting. So have you looked at the astrology of the different ones?
Well, no, I need to do that actually. That is on my list of looking at when. I mean, the Pfizer came out November the 14th. So the fact that was the first one out, I think, has got a lot to do with the power behind it. It may end up being the most effective, purely because of when it actually hit the first across finishing line, really. But yeah, so that will probably have some power. But there's going to be a lot more investment and research into this from going forward, isn't there? So, but yeah, no, it'd be good to look at the companies actually and see. I think we looked at Pfizer on the current climate webinars, but we need to go back to that, I think.
Your view on AstraZeneca versus Pfizer, is that a gut thing, or is that to do with?
No, it's just the Moderna and Pfizer. It's my own personal thing. It was, it originated from stem. It was a tissue. It gets a little bit controversial really, but there's you know, there was some, you know, fetus stem cell tissue, and that's what it's been built on, and that sort of thing. And not that I'm, you know, I'm not discouraging anyone from doing that. I want to be really clear on that. But so I just feel that, yeah, I think I would prefer to go with the AstraZeneca because of that. It works on, it does not work on any mutation. It acts more like most vaccines do. But that's not to say it's going to be more effective. I just think I'd be more comfortable. But again, I probably don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
I just know that, which has sort of put me off the others. But again, I may not have the choice.
Yeah,
and
no,
so,
we might not get the choice. I mean, I suppose my thing is, I mean, people understand my approach. We see if I can delay it as long as I possibly can till we understand it better. Then, you know, because I suspect, I joke about it, but I'm probably not going to be able to shop in Waitrose in a year's time unless I can prove I had a vaccine.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
the health guy, you know, last night said, look, we're going to have to take it every year. We all kind of knew it was going that way, but he's actually said it for the first time, you know, or at least the first time I noticed him saying it. So yeah, so my strategy is delay as long as I can. If I get a choice, I'll be back on to you.
Yeah, yeah, well, exactly. And, you know, it'll be like smallpox. I get, you know, it'll be like, it's once it's gone, it's gone. It'll be like polio and, you know, things like it's,
Yeah,
but
I
I
remember
think,
that as a child, you know, queuing up to get it, you know.
exactly. And you had to, didn't you?
Yeah.
You know, you had to get tetanus shots because you were all playing outside with rusty nails and, you know, things like that. But it's, I think the, what's going to happen is, you know, we're going to have to get vaccinated every year until this, but you know, it's also going to be the last time we have a global virus. I think this is
so?
the last time. Absolutely.
Oh, that's great to hear.
I think it's the last time. There is no government and no pharmaceutical, no government's going to let it happen again. We're going to be invested in it. We were told to invest in it. We didn't. And pharmaceutical companies are going to be, you know, heavily funded to ensure that it doesn't happen again. We cannot afford a breakdown like this ever again. So
yeah, I mean,
I mean, you know, so we've just been the casualties of this. But I think short term, in
well, you know, I'm a great believer in, I mean, I followed the coincidence all the way since I started. I mean, I've always been a coincidence following guy. Don't believe in them. I don't believe they're coincidences. So
yeah.
And so here we are. And I think just when and even just this morning, a really good follower of this was in touch with me about genuine fear about taking her injection next week. I think coincidentally, here you show up at this very moment when maybe a lot of people are now beginning to get it offered to them.
Yeah.
And your positive thing about that is, I can only imagine, is encouraging for a lot of people, certainly for me. I mean, I had the privilege of doing my thing out in Zambia. You know, I was out in Zambia, but you had to take the yellow fever thing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It didn't cross my mind not to go and get it. But for
no, you don't do
this has really got me. You know,
and well, I think there's a lot of mental energy out there into, but there's fear. It's fear, and but I think people forget we have been working on coronavirus vaccines for 13 years.
That's a good point.
You know, it's not. It's and a lot's been learned from that. It was never perfected, but it still progressed, and the World Health Organization has invested in this, you know, for a long time. So I think people it's just fear, you know, and it's so understandable given what's the cycles are. They are, you know, screaming fear. But we will get it's the worst is over.
I mean, given what you guys, I mean, we're running on a wee bit, but maybe people will want me to ask this. Given that you know, astrologers will say, like, this transit or this cycle is due, and you know, it's almost like what you said about Trump. Look, if it wasn't Trump, it was going to be someone else. It was going to have to trigger all this change. You know, I suppose the virus was coming anyway.
If it wasn't that, so
it was coming. Something like it was coming anyway. But the point, the very powerful point is, it was coming anyway. Would it fade away anyway with or without the vaccine? I know the science is two-sided. There's people say definitely,
possibly, but possibly, but I would imagine there'd be more casualties. That's what I imagine.
More casualties, yeah.
That's what I think. Yeah,
really believe that,
yeah. I think that's.
And that's from an astrological view. It's not just
I mean, the thing is with like the Neptune and Pisces right now, you can't escape the drug situation. That you can't escape that vaccine. But it didn't have to be a vaccine. It could have been a tincture. It could have been there would have been the resolve in this would have still had to have. It wouldn't have faded away. It could have been worse outcomes for this, and the vaccine is a really positive outcome for this. It could have been worse. It could have been worse. And just to say, it reminds me of the dancing disease. Which mostly in Europe, but Germany, but in other pockets, people died of malnutrition. And a dancing disease, and I mean, people can Google this because it's fascinating, but because they were convulsing, and now they think it's more about anxiety, and that's exactly what from an astrological point of view, it's exactly what it would have been. So without the vaccine, I mean, I've even said, my father-in-law, I was desperately trying to get, when is Wendy on the list, not because I am desperately trying to get him vaccinated, but because I said he's going to die of anxiety before he's so fearful. He is such a fearful man. And the cycle has completely picked up his chart. And so for me, it was more about his peace of mind. And I think that is where, fade away, it's more the mental illness that comes with all of this, not necessarily the physical.
Yeah, God bless you for sharing that insight. I mean, that didn't occur to me. That's a phenomenal insight. And I mean, I was on a podcast myself I was in as a guest on Friday night for people who are suffering from severe anxiety, potential, thinking of suicide, that sort of thing. Exactly. And we know that the anxiety and fear thing is rife, and mental illness is rife, So this is obviously this time again, but to see it from that perspective is rather, it's very interesting. Well, I mean, just a final question. Sorry, on you go.
I was going to say, and all of these cycles also represent depression. So there's going to be, we've got a lot of, PTSD that's going to come, people are grieving. They haven't even been allowed to grieve. And so
I'll go after this question. We have mentioned pharmaceutical companies, right? And one of the things that keeps coming through my work now is looking at the paradigm that says, look, if something's wrong, we must find a drug, pharmaceutical solution, as opposed to a non-pharmaceutical solution, or let's look at the reason why someone's ill in the first place. Astrologically, are conversations happening around, do we move into a more holistic approach rather than just staying with the current paradigm?
Yeah, no, I think we're definitely moving into a holistic approach. The cycle of Neptune and Pisces, which rules all this pharmaceutical stuff. Also, when that last happened in the 1850s and 60s, we had Darwin come out with The Origin of the Species, which completely changed our science from that moment. Because of, and the reason he was able to publish that was all of the things he found pretty much in the New World, New Zealand and Australia, or that, and all the botanical stuff that he was able to make his findings for. So I think this is all going to be revisited, rewritten. And also, as you've got the planet Uranus traveling through the sign of Taurus, Taurus is the Earth Mother. We are going to go back. We're going to find what's happened in the last couple of 100 years is we've completely disconnected from our planet. All the things that, if you get bitten by, if you get stinging nettle, instead of finding a dock leaf nearby, you put calamine lotion on it. I mean, that's, so I think the sensibility of going back to earth things is going to become more apparent. And I think COVID, again, is a driver for that. Doctors the doctors recommending vitamin C. It makes such a difference. And this cycle, just to say, the cycle last January, it was also with other planets that rule the vitality. So this is why vitamin C is a very important component of this. It also rules a planet that rules the lungs, which is why the respiratory, it's very complicated. But there's a lot of things that we can actually find, I think, and these are going to become more and more apparent to people around the world. And people are going to be taking vitamin D and C and all this sort of stuff and finding ways to engineer it, to produce it themselves and things like that.
That is it's so hopeful. I mean, I mean, everything we do one of these, someone comments, the best one yet. I think this might be the best one yet. So, but again, given my experience of you, I'm not surprised. Wendy, you've been an absolute gift to all of us. I really can't wait to share this on Wednesday night. And wish you every success with your move back to the country. And,
thanks, Jack.
And that you continue to thrive as a wonderful astrologer you are. So thanks for sharing your time with us. We much appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack, and much appreciated. And keep well, keep safe, and thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it. It's been
what a privilege
Thank
for
you.
us. Okay, so bye now.
Thanks, Jack.